Hey, what's up, folks? Welcome back to On Texas Football, and welcome back to another edition of Sunday School. I'm lifetime Longhorn Rod Babers. Appreciate you guys joining us for another edition of Sunday School, getting closer and closer to the actual football season. NFL training camp has started right, on the verge of training camp starting up for the Longhorns too. So this is exciting. Now we're going to start talking actual football. But today, on this edition of Sunday School, we're going to discuss probably one of the, I would say, the most important and honestly one of the more stupefying issues for the Longhorns in Steve Sarkisian's tenure here at Texas. So we'll get to that. But of course, our Sunday School brought to you by our good friends over at Laura Baker and her team at Keller Williams. So we appreciate her. I'll give you a special message from her coming up a little bit later on. Also, she's having an open house coming up later today, and I'll give you some more information about that. But before we do that, let's break down this specific topic, and it's one that Longhorn fans, I'm sure everywhere, have been a little frustrated with: red zone offense. And I don't know why Texas doesn't have a good red zone offense. I mean, I consider myself to be a football investigator. I try to do a job, a really good job of being thorough, diving deep, going rabbit holing into, specific topics and areas. And I've been looking at Texas red zone offense, like a lot of you, for the last 2 years. And considering how much talent Texas has on offense, I can't figure out why it doesn't translate to elite red zone offense. They've had more players drafted in the NFL in the last 2 years than any other team in college football. And a lot of that is on offense. You've had multiple running backs drafted into the NFL. You've had multiple tight ends drafted. You've had 3 wide receivers drafted. 4 O linemen you've had drafted, and a quarterback. Had a quarterback recently drafted. I know it was in the 7th round, but still, I mean, those are you've had so much draftable, which is elite talent on offense in the last couple of years. And Sark himself is one of the more respected and I think one of the more creative and modern progressive play callers at any level of football. And I give you guys a lot of breakdowns about how his concepts are so creative and why they're so dangerous and unique. And yet, even with Sark's football acumen, he can't figure out what's going on with the red zone offense for Texas. It is, like I said, I'm stupefied by it. I'm often flabbergasted by how inefficient and how inept the red zone offense for Texas can be. Just the raw numbers, you guys know them. I don't have to keep giving you the numbers, but just so we can have context for this discussion. Last year, they were 101st in red zone offense, but 54th in touchdown percentage in the red zone. So that's pretty good. They were converting 63% of their red zone drives into touchdowns. That was an improvement from 2023, where they were 120th in touchdown percentage in the red zone, converting just half of their red zone drives into touchdowns. They were 90th in overall red zone offense. Now, 2 years, the first 2 years for Sark, 2 years prior to that, in 2021 and 22, Texas was on the verge of being great to elite on red zone offense. Strangely enough, in 2021, when he had his least talented team, they were 4th in touchdown percentage in the red zone, and they were 4th in red zone offense. Strange. My theory has always been, and I heard Sark somewhat confirm this in one of his media availabilities. My theory was that it's the post-Bijan Rojo hangover. Bijan and Rojo were so unique in their violent twitch. Basically, there's no run play that you could, there's not a run play that they couldn't run at a high level. And both of those guys ended up being NFL running backs, and, good chance, not only Bijan ended up being like a top 5 back in the league. So you were at a distinct advantage where you had 2 backs and you could call anything. And they both could execute it at an extremely high level. And I almost feel like, Sark, he kind of admitted this, basically, that, life after Bijan and Rojo in that area, because both of those guys were great at breaking tackles. They both had like I said, violent twitch. They were patient, great vision. There wasn't a run concept they couldn't execute at high level. And in the red zone, it was almost guaranteed with Rojo and Bijan. All right. It's, and put some Bijan on it with a side of Rojo, and you're going to be good. And Sark, I'm paraphrasing, at his media availability essentially said, yeah, that's a big part of why we have, kind of struggled in the red zone post Bijan and Rojo other backs are great. These guys, they are NFL players too. But those two, that unique combination at running back, I do think for Texas made a huge difference in that, condensed area in the red zone. So that's just my theory. Like I said, I had a little bit of something. Right now, I do think the stats back it up, but right now we don't care about that. Right now, we're trying to address the issue, right? How do we turn Texas's, red zone offense into a juggernaut? Because that's one of the last missing pieces. I mean, you were at the Final Four the last 2 years, and you can make the argument came down to red zone offense or the lack of execution in red zone offense. So I went and looked at all the red zone plays. All right. It took me a little while, but I went and looked at it. Texas had 69 red zone drives last season. 44 of those ended in touchdowns, which is, it's not bad. Like I said, that's you're pretty much average right there, right? You're at 54th. I mean, it's nothing, like I said, probably above average, I should say. But I think Texas, considering the talent they have, they should be in the top 25 in red zone offense, especially touchdown percentage in the red zone. We'll get to that. 11 field goals. So 55 of your drives at least ended in points. But field goals to me is a lot of times that's a win for the defense. Feels like a win. I play defense. Feels like a win for the defense when we keep an offense to a field goal, especially these days. Like back when I played, and hell, in '99, there was still people running the option, the triple option. Like you had Nebraska, you know what I mean? That was running the option, old school option when I came into the Big 12. And you ended up with some defensive struggles, and you didn't score as many points. But now we're in the spread era, man. Teams routinely are getting in shootouts and scoring a ton of points. You keep a team to a field goal, it's a win for the defense. So touchdowns is the objective. Touchdowns is the goal. So I went and looked at the 25 drives basically that ended where you either ended up settling for a field goal if you're Texas, or ended with 0 points. Right? Because you had 11 field goals, but 44 touchdowns, 69. That's how we did the math. And I really looked at it. 58% of your red zone drives that didn't score a touchdown. Right? That's what I'm paying specific attention to. Right? I would say 58% of them you had a negative play, a tackle for loss, a sack, a penalty, or a stuffed run. A stuffed run is when a run gets 0 yards. So 0 yards or negative yards. They call that a stuffed run. You used to have stuff rate. Hard to keep up with these days, but that's your stuff rate. All right. How many of your what percentage of runs are for 0 yards or a loss? And it just 16% of Texas red zone runs resulted in 0 yards or a loss. And so you talk about close to 60% of the red zone drives where you didn't score a touchdown, you had a wasted play. Or now, if it wasn't wasted, then it actually cost you yards. You actually regressed. You actually went backwards. And I think that's a huge help to the defense, right? Getting you in third and long situations with a field, all right, that, is condensed and you don't have to defend as much. I don't have to defend the deep ball. We're in the red zone. All right, it's only that back line is another defender for me. All right, that back end zone line is another defender, and so is the sideline. So I'm sitting pretty. And I will say that's also a big part of it. Red zone defense is easier to play than defense in between the 20s. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but for DBs, if you actually are thinking the game through, there are certain routes that you really don't have to defend in the red zone, right? And because of the condensed area, the windows are going to be tighter for the quarterback. And a lot of quarterbacks, unless they're freaks, and there's some freaks out there, they're not willing to make those really tight window throws in an already condensed area like the red zone. So for Texas, I think that's also part of it, right? Sark works with space, and he creates space really well. And when you take away that space, I think sometimes for his offense, maybe at least for the passing game, it's tougher to have that high level of proficiency. I will say this though, I do think there's a great kind of riddle on the defensive side of the ball, and I don't even know if it's meant for you to solve. It's just meant to get you to think. It says, how do you defend more space with fewer defenders? Like, how do you defend more space with fewer defenders? Like, think that through. Because that's modern football. That's the conundrum that the defense is in. I got to figure out how to defend more space with fewer defenders, because that's what offenses are forcing you to do. But in the red zone, you don't have to worry about that riddle, because there isn't more space. There's less space. And I got more defenders with less space. Advantages kind of go more and more, just little slivers of it, to the defense. So I think that's a big issue for Texas, is they're their own worst enemy in the red zone. Self-inflicted wounds. I think it's a big part of it. Like I said, damn near 60% of your red zone drives that don't score a touchdown, you have a negative play on those drives, or a play that gave you nothing at all, 0 yards. So I think the first part of it for me is that Texas has to be a little bit more buttoned up. They got to clean up execution in the red zone overall. They are running more gap and power schemes in the red zone, which is smart. Some of the outside zone concepts, which is Texas bread and butter in the run game. They're top 10 in outside zone rate last year. Wiseman was top 10 in outside zone rushing yards last year in the country. That's not the only run play they have. They run a ton of different run concepts, have a variety of them, but that's the one they run the best, or at least last year. That was the one they executed the best. That doesn't work as well in the red zone, because it takes a while for that outside zone to develop, and defenders are fast flow, quick keys in the red zone, because everything happens a little bit faster. So Texas has to get more quick hitting downhill concepts in the red zone. So you're seeing them run more power gap schemes, duo in the red zone, just trying to get downhill. Problem is, and we know this, Texas, they like big humans on the offensive line, but they're not bullies. They're big, but they're not bullies, right? That's why Sark will call a bit between the legs snap on a short yardage play, or call an end and around against Georgia on the short yardage play. Right? Because he has the arch package for short yards, because he understands that my offensive line, just asking them to line up and play bully ball, that's not their strength. They can try, but that's not their strength. We all know that. Longhorn fans have watched that for years. We know that's not this. Now, this is new offensive line this year, so maybe there's something different. But that offensive line, that wasn't necessarily their strength. They were big, but they were more like big finesse offensive linemen. They were big though. But not big bullies. And it helps to have bullies in the red zone, right? It just helps to have an offensive line that can just be road graders in the red zone. And Texas doesn't really have a lot of those on the offensive line. Good players, but that's not what they have. So Texas running more gap schemes, but they're not as effective, because that's not necessarily the strength of your O-line either. And something else I was looking at was just most successful concepts. Sark does a lot of different things offensively. I call it a gumbo of cheat codes, an amalgamation of amplifiers and all these different hacks to try to overload the circuitry of the defense, right? It's forced them to make a mistake. You got pre-snap motions and shifts, and it uses a ton of RPOs and play action, lots of misdirection, along with funky formations. He's just giving you a lot to process defensively. And I think if I'm tracking, what concepts in the red zone specifically for Sark, which one of those amplifiers is most successful, I would probably say, honestly, misdirection. Like if you go look at all the touchdowns in the red zone for Texas, and it's baked into Sark's offense, but there are extreme versions of misdirection in the red zone that I think pay off a lot for Sark. And the reason I think is just simple. I mean, you have a false key in the red zone. I mean, by the time you catch up, it's already too late, right? A false step in the red zone, false step in between the 20s. If you got great speed, you can make it up in the red zone, because everything happens a lot quicker, because it's more condensed area. Boom, you can already kind of take yourself out of the play a little bit quicker. And I think the plays I've watched, the really successful ones for Sark, it seems in the red zone amplified with the misdirection, whether it be the pre-snap motions and shifts, whether it be multi-motion, whether it be switch routes, switch releases at line of scrimmage. We can talk about split flow in the backfield. We can talk about, it's a lot. Pulling O-linemen, he loves to pull O-linemen. Sometimes not even for the run game. It literally to either for the fake, the deception, or sometimes I think to add another element to the misdirection, to try to throw off to give false keys to the defense. And I honestly, I think that's something you should lean on even more in the red. It's actually, it's baked into his. It's hard to track, what factor, what misdirection factor is in every specific play. That's not something I quantifiably that I have tracked, but just eye test. It's baked in everywhere, and I think more extreme versions of it in the red zone would help Sark. Just like I said, just my honest opinion, just watching a lot of film of the Sark offense, and like when they move the pocket, which they'll do a lot with Arch. Moving the pocket has worked really well in the red zone for Texas. Think about how many times Quinn rolled out to Matthew Golden, or had those rollouts that I think that would help too. Especially it's going to be good because Arch throws well on the run, and he's more athletic and more mobile. So it just, I think for Sark, he's gonna, and I think I know he's been thinking about it and working on it, but I do think you got to start leaning on what works. And for Sark, I think a lot of his red zone success has been based on, false keys, giving false keys to the defense. Now you can't do too much because like you said, you don't have a lot of time in the red zone. But like I said, I do think most of the touchdowns that I've been tracking for Texas in the red zone, a lot of misdirection, like multiple examples of it within the same play. Let's talk about Arch in the red zone real quick before we close things out. Arch in the red zone last year, very small sample size, right? We're talking about Colorado State, Mississippi State, ULM, UTSA, and not juggernauts at all. So we got to throw that out there. Got to preface the conversation with that. But I don't want to simplify it and say he's going to fix all of Sark's red zone issues, because we don't know that. But it's he does have a lot, or at least from what I've watched, he does have a lot of the traits that can be weaponized in the red zone, which we'll talk about here. Now, just his red zone stats, like a lot of his stats, are great, right? Over 80% completion percentage in the red zone in those sample size games I gave you. 8.4 yards per attempt. First down touchdown rate of over 50% first down touchdown rate, which is really good. And you had over 80% touchdown rate when Arch in that sample size with Arch in the red zone. Hell, I believe Navy led the country last year with like 80% touchdown rate in the red zone. So but that's against some really terrible defenses. Let's be honest, like just defenses that are not very good, but just showing you that he does have some of those traits. Because one of his first touchdown might have been his first touchdown actually this year, the Colorado State game where he's in the red zone with Silas Bowden. The scramble, I believe it was a scramble drill touchdown. The pocket broke down and he decided to scramble to his right, but scramble, keeping his eyes downfield, and then found Silas Bowden late. I believe that was against Colorado State. He's got that ability. The scramble drill is another element in the red zone that can really pay off for a quarterback. As a matter of fact, we just heard VY tell the story again about his famous game-winning touchdown run versus USC, and shout out to Mac Brown and Greg Davis, because they said they wanted to give him the option to scramble. We're going to give you the option to run. So we're going to drop you back, and we're going to give you a simple read. If it ain't open, you just need to go do your thing, because the scramble is 2 plays in 1. The scramble drill is 3 plays in 1. All right. I got to defend the initial play. I got to defend the scramble drill. And then I got to defend potentially the scramble. Right. So, and with Arch, I think you got that ability, but we'll get into that too. But look at the best red zone offenses in college football. They all have, football period. They all have a dual threat. at quarterback, the best red zone offenses, because a +1 in the running game, a +1 period, all right, is something defense has to account for in the red zone. And then when at its rudimentary core, football is a numbers game. And a dual threat quarterback is going to add a whole nother player to the count for you on offense, and you got to account for that on defense. If you don't, they're going to make you pay. So I went to look this up. So 12 of the top 21 offenses in red zone touchdown percentage in college football have a quarterback who's either a leading rusher or the second leading rusher. I know Arch Manning is not going to be the lead rusher or the second leading rusher for Texas. But my point is that translates. You can weaponize that in the red zone, that dual threat ability of the quarterback. That is not a coincidence. If you go look at the top 10 NFL offenses in red zone touchdown percentage, they have a dual threat quarterback. I went and looked at fantasy points on quarterback runs, right? Accumulation. So fantasy points on quarterback runs, whether it be design runs, whether you're talking about scrambles. 7 of the top 10 quarterbacks, if you go look at 7 of the top 11, actually, in fantasy points produced on quarterback runs, also have a top 10 offense in touchdown percentage in the red zone. I don't think that's a coincidence. 7 of the top 10 quarterbacks in scramble rate have teams that are also top 10 in touchdown percentage in the red zone in the NFL. I don't think it's a coincidence. 5 of the top 7 NFL quarterbacks in designed runs also have the 1st, 2nd, 6th, 9th, and 10th best offenses in red zone touchdown percentage. I don't believe that is a coincidence. I believe in coincidences. That ain't one of them. Sark is going to be able to weaponize Arch's mobility in the red zone. He can do it by protecting him at times on design runs, but I think Arch is going to do it on his own with the scrambling ability that he has and with the scramble drill, which we've already seen. I've kind of seen the scrambling ability of him too, but not necessarily in the red zone. I don't know if he's got that many stats to be like a scrambling in the red zone, but I think he will use it in the red zone. And even if he doesn't use it, the defense has to respect it. And that's going to open up a lot of other things offensively in the red zone. So that's the more, and I've said this before, I think in terms of just straight drop backs situations, which also I think for Sark would help in the red zone. Sark has a lot of quarterback aids, built in the passing game, the RPO element, the screen element, the play action pass element. And there are times in the red zone where, yeah, those elements work, but there are times they can also be a detriment to you. Because if the defense is blitzing or if when your offensive lineman gets beat really quickly, it can blow up a play. Like it can just blow up a pass play, period. And we've seen it happen with Texas a few times. Straight drop back situations in the red zone. Even though, like I said, Sark's a play action RPO man, but straight dropbacks, I think it gives a quarterback a little easier time to go through progressions in that condensed area, right? Go through those progressions quicker. And we know that wasn't a strength for Quinn. Quinn wasn't comfortable getting deep into progressions and going through them quickly. And in the red zone, everything happens quicker. And so that didn't necessarily translate to success for him. But I think for Arch, who is comfortable getting through progressions and may be able to work through them quickly in the red zone, straight drop back in the red zone, as opposed to so much play action at RPO. I'm not saying you can't have it. Sark is going to do that anyway, but maybe adding more straight dropbacks. Quinn, actually, there were some times when Quinn in straight dropback situations in the red zone had a lot of success, but I do believe those were, like I said, I think they were routes, probably premeditated kind of routes for him. Like he knew exactly where he was going with the football. I do think that, and Sark designed it that way, schemed it open with the formation and with the motions and the shifts. But I think it was, kind of a read, not necessarily him going through progressions, but him knowing exactly where he was going with the football. A predetermined read. which I think that happens in some offenses too. I mean, if you got like a trick play or something like that you're running, or any type of play. So there are some plays where no, this is a predetermined read. This is where we're going with the football. On this play, we've schemed it open. You don't necessarily need to go through progressions. This guy's going to be open. And I feel like there were times in the red zone last year where Quinn had success on some straight up predetermined reads. Like, exactly this guy is where you're going with the football. All right, last thing I want to get into, red zone targets, the top red zone targets last year that, and you probably can guess these, right? That Texas utilized the most in the red zone. Jaden Blue, Gunnar Helm, and Matthew Golden. Those are your three top guys in red zone target share last season. And now all those guys are gone. But you return your fourth, and fifth highest, most targeted, I should say, receivers in the red zone. And you also have bigger receivers, which I think will actually pay dividends in the red zone for you. You got 6'2", you got multiple 6'2", 6'3" guys. Wingo, Parker Livingstone, Emmett Mosley, they're expected to play. I mean, DeAndre Moore is 5'10", 5'11", but you have bigger receivers overall. That should translate to guys winning more contested catches in the red zone. And not they shouldn't be throwing like fades, old school fades or anything, but they could win more contested catch situations. And that scramble drill that I always talk about in the red zone with bigger receivers, bigger targets usually makes a difference. All right, let's thank our sponsor, Laura Baker, before we end things. This edition of Sunday School is brought to you by accomplished Austin realtor Laura Baker. Laura and the Andy Allen team and Keller Williams can handle all of your real estate needs in the Austin area. Laura is not only a diehard Longhorn fan, but a longtime Austin real estate expert. So give her a shout today, please, at 512-784-0505. If you have any concerns or questions regarding real estate in the Austin area, you can reach out to her at 512-784-0505, or you can reach out at Laura at AndyAllenTeam.com. That's Laura at AndyAllenTeam.com. And right now, as a matter of fact, coming up a little bit later on today, she is having an open house. How about this? From 1 to 3 p.m., Laura is going to have an open house at 11208. All right, 11208 Mickelson Drive. All right, the price of this home is listed at $420,000. All right, that's 11208 Mickelson Drive. The photos look beautiful, by the way. From 1 to 3 p.m. It's going to be an open house. Laura Baker and the Andy Allen team there. Check them out. Laura at AndyAllenTeam.com. That's 512-784-0505. That is the open house, 1 to 3 p.m., 11208 Mickelson Drive. And thank you very much to Laura Baker and her team for sponsoring this edition of Sunday School. I really appreciate her and her ongoing support of On Texas Football. And thank you guys as well for joining and for watching and for listening. We really appreciate Matthew behind the scenes is the real MVP. We always appreciate his hard work as well. For Matthew and for Laura Baker, I'm lifetime Longhorn Rod Babers. Until next time, hook 'em horns.